Welcome. We are excited to have you here and to welcome Raphael, who you'll hear a little bit more from in just a few minutes in her talk From Chanel to the Greater Paris Metropolis, Researching the Future Through Art. First, I just want to share why we're having this conversation. At Institute for the Future, we believe that artists are futurists, that artists let us see the world with new eyes and invite us into that space. We have a gallery of the future where we're based in Palo Alto, California in the US. And the first time I really experienced a piece of art as a piece of foresight was that this project. This was 2015, and you can see our former colleague and research affiliate, Jeremy, is here in the middle of this fashion show. And this was around how we might clothe ourselves in the future in recognition of climate change in the Anthropocene and how we might equip ourselves for these futures that we would face. So this was a first formative experience for me. We've also had at the Gallery of the Future the past futures of Howard Rheingold, longtime Institute for the Future colleague and respected community member. Our colleague Jake Dunnigan and others have created artifacts from the future, which are, future visions of cities to bring to life different scenarios. This in partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We've had an Afrofutures exhibit. You can see the artists, Lance Coleman and others who are featured here. He's a former IFTF fellow. Our Gallery of the Future, where we have some artifacts. So some of our colleagues are actually artists and futurists. And they inspire me through artifacts like this one around a scenario of cybernetically augmented animals that team up with artificial intelligence in the year 2046, or trust objects. Sometimes when artists are futurists, it's very tangible, something you can pick up and actually hold in your hand. And then most recently, this speculative future that you can see here by Weena Lin. And this is a scenario which imagines exhausting all of our natural resources, having not just a biological collapse, but also a societal collapse that through which we lose our ancestral knowledge. And this artist has created really stirring pieces of art, which we've also featured. So we have a strong commitment to this topic. And that is why when I recently got to reconnect with Raphael, it was really inspiring for me to think about how someone begins as an artist, becomes a futurist, and melds those two practices together, that intersection. So we'll introduce her more in just a moment, but I have a quick poll question that I'm hoping, Aicha, you can share into the conversation here for our participants we have gathered. For those of you who have tuned in, and I know we'll have some people watching this afterwards, are you using artistic content or collaborating with artists in your foresight practice? I know this is a foresight talk, so in this series, many people who are joining us are already engaged in a foresight practice, others, some formally, some less formally. So we were just curious to calibrate to this. So it looks like we have 59% are using artistic content or collaborating with artists. So that's a good array. That's great to see.
Yeah.
Thank you. And let's see, do we share it? We've shared the results. Others can see that as well, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. So here, just a couple of housekeeping things here at the beginning. You know that most of us have already introduced ourselves into the chat. If you want to be chatting to the whole group, be sure that you include everyone in there. And feel free to ask questions as we go. You can use either the Q&A or the chat, and my colleague Aicha will be minding that as we go. Our agenda, our kind of learning agenda for the day. First, I'll just share a little bit about Institute for the Future. We'll introduce Raphael for the core of the conversation, and then we do want to have some Q&A time. And we'll be recording this, and it should be available within the next week or so on the Institute for the Future page. So first, a little bit about Institute for the Future. We are an independent public interest organization. We operate as a nonprofit, and we've been doing this foresight for 55 some years now. Our mission is to help organizations, communities, and leaders become future ready. And we work with not just studying the future, but really creating tools and working those tools to be able to turn foresight into insights that ultimately lead to action. Many of you who are here today are here because you are part of our foresight community. You've gone through one or more of our different foresight trainings. The classic one, Foresight Essentials. I just finished teaching this just recently, which was really fun. We have some others for individuals that are kind of thinking of it as the 201, if Foresight Essentials is 101. Design Futures, which is around making the future come alive in the present and scenario building. And we also do some custom trainings for teams who are, saying we really need to up our game in terms of foresight in our organization or in our community. And so we do a training there on site. We do some future back accelerators where there's a particular question of interest, and we can apply the tools of foresight to that. And then we have some Coursera courses. And I know I've spoken to some of you who I know have taken those on both life after COVID-19 or in the midst of COVID-19, as it were, and then futures thinking on Coursera. There's a specialization as well. We have some upcoming trainings, so take a quick screenshot if this is something you geek out about so that you can keep tabs on those. They're also all listed on our Institute for the Future website, www.iftf.org. And we're back in face-to-face trainings. So those of you who are part of our, are at this Foresight Talk because you're part of our Foresight community, you know that there has been great invention that's gone into all of the virtual trainings, and those continue and have been very popular. We're just starting to now weave back in the face-to-face, and so those are selling out quickly. Range of resources, we just want to reiterate that are available to all of you. We have talks like this one, Foresight Talk webinars. We are also game to do Futures Buddy matches. If you're looking for kindred spirits in the world of foresight, that's something that we can help with. We have a newsletter, practitioner meetups, a range of Medium posts. And then also a soft spot in my heart is our Urgent Optimist community. Our colleague Jane McGonigal leads this, and this is a range of people who, just like it sounds, bring optimism to their lens about the future and also a sense of urgency and a clear-eyed view at the challenges that we face. And together in this online community, navigate those challenges. So I commend all of those resources to you if you're interested. And the last thing I'll just say is, if you're part of an organization and you're looking to go deeper around how you can increase your preparedness, I just encourage you to check out our Vantage program in particular. You can see all of the features that are a part of this there. So back to Raphael, welcome. Very excited to be able to have this conversation. I first met Raphael more than 10 years ago now, and we were doing a project that was with a Finnish group. We called it a Talkut, and we were I remember us meeting in Palo Alto and having that exchange, and been tracking your work in the intervening years since then. She has a mixed background in art and in economics and more, as you'll hear from her in just a moment. I think of her as an artist, researcher, a futurist, and she's the founder of Lead Future Lab, which you'll hear more about. It's a hybrid foresight research platform based in Paris, but working internationally. And since 2002, she and her colleagues and collaborators have designed future labs for a wide range of companies. You'll hear about a few of those coming up, but Galeries Lafayette, Lexus, Chanel, some brands that are in that space. Also, in a pragmatic sense, worked with cities, Greater Paris, Copenhagen, for example, In the academic realm, she's worked with groups like Aalto University in Helsinki, and also cultural institutions like the Geneva Museum of Art and History, for example, contributing to the R&D practices there. So I think of you, Raphael, as a left brain, right brain thinker. You bring those together quite beautifully. And so we just wanted to start here at the beginning with a little bit about your journey. So if you could start with sharing, what was your journey into futures thinking? You are quite grounded as an artist, and so we'd like to begin
Thank you, Rachel, for this great introduction. Yes, now I introduce myself as a futurist and artist researcher, but I created that ecosystem from an artistic practice. But even before I started that artistic research practice, I already had a very mixed background, because in the 90s, on one hand, I was doing urban photography, I was doing drawings, I was doing radio shows about contemporary art, I was very into art trends and art theory. So that was one part of my life. And on the other side of my life, I was studying economics and finance, and I was working on a trading floor, selling commodities derivative to big corporations in different countries, and having a perspective on, the global economy of resources, the global finance, our economic organization life. So I had those two legs going in parallel. And at some point, I really wanted to combine them and to do something with it. And that's when I started to, I quit my job, I quit my radio shows. I decided to focus on my art practice and become an artist. So that's 2000. And in 2000, that's where I created my artistic laboratory. So 2000 is really a pivotal moment where I put a little bit of order in things that I was doing before, such as urban photography, or such as being very into theory. And for instance, art history was a way of understanding how, time passes, how one movement follows another one. But in economy, it's the same. On financial markets, you have trends and movements that comes one after the other. So I could see parallel between the evolution of the economic world and the evolution of the artistic world. And so that I had a lot of intuition about crossroads, bridges. And when I started my ecosystem, I wanted to have the possibility to be 1 foot in the art world and 1 foot outside, and continue to explore that bridge in and out the art sphere. So that's really my kind of early years in the 90s. And now I'm going to share some images, of course.
Yep, can't help yourself.
We speak about art. We want to see images, of course. Voila. So this is what I'm going to share with you. When in 2000, when I started, I put a little bit of order in my practice, and I organized all my photo-based work into what I call an image lab. So that's the first image. On the side, I also wanted to have an idea lab to extract knowledge from my practice, but also to experiment collaboration. So that's Image Lab and Idea Lab were my two vehicles in 2000. And from that practice, at some point, it was clear that the future was even more relevant. And I turned around, maybe around 2010, I really turned toward future research and urban research. That urban research was already there before, but, so my work is really this ecosystem of artistic practice, knowledge production, collaboration, and urban exploration. Just everything in one slide. Now let's look closer. So just let's go a little bit inside my image lab. Let me make sure you can see well. Okay, in my image lab was really based on that urban photography that I was doing in cities around the world, with plenty of images that I was using them as samples. I was very influenced by electronic music, and for me, my images were samples of reality that I could create with. It was not so much about documenting or telling a story. It was more using those fragments to create image architectures. And my lab was very much dedicated to how can I give value to those images by combining them, whether as artistic installation, as the one you see on the top right, as photographic collage, and other practices. So I'm not going to share so much about this image lab, but I want to take one example to show also how through an artwork you can really think. It was really this approach that I had of art to create aesthetic forms, subjective expressions, but also through that process of creating, you could also produce knowledge, think, explore ideas, explore hypotheses. And that image on the top right is called Poetico-Speculative Bubble. I did that artwork in 2001, which was the year the NASDAQ exploded. You know, it was the first promises of the digital economy. At that time, the NASDAQ was very high, and there was this collapse because, in fact, the economy was not, there was no, the money was not there. So there was something about this imaginary promise associated with the financial sphere that for me, it was very artistic in a way. It was very much the way you think of the value of an artwork. It can be an incredible promise. It can be an incredible image. Maybe it's worth a lot, maybe it's worth nothing. And that question of speculation, I thought it was interesting to show that it had an economic dimension, but also an artistic dimension. And that in my artistic laboratory, I was really like speculating on my own images and trying to reveal the value by combining them. So with that image, first it was trying to give it's a very immersive photographic installation. It's 800 photographs which are nailed on the wall. There is this disco ball that there is a dot of light on each image. There was a soundtrack in the room, so that sometimes it would be very joyful, sometimes it would be really almost freaky. You could read change of emotion. There would be a lot of versatility. Sometimes you would feel you are in a nightclub. So you could really have a very broad diversity of emotion in that immersive environment. And I really wanted to get a physical, experiential appreciation of that artistic proposition as a way also of looking at the sphere of information that were, 2000, it's really the moment where the digital era is expanding. And for me, it was a way of, working on financial markets. You're already working with plenty of information, and that information is sometimes valuable, sometimes not valuable. And for me, this artwork was really a way of nailing something at the crossroad of, the digital era, the art world. It was the beginning of digital cameras as well, with all that promise of digital creation, and with that artwork. So that was my key ideas. But then after I did that artwork, because also I was influenced by architect who was working on cities and using that concept of datascaping the city afterward. So it was really, and that's why it's really interesting to think with artwork, because there is so much you can pull threads out of an artwork. And it felt it could be also a way of envisioning the city as a cosmos of information. And so that dropped a little bit of a little idea in my head. And much later, when I worked on the Greater Paris, I wanted to use that idea. So I'm not going to go further on that because I'll speak about it later in the session, but just to show that with an artwork that is already 20 years old, you can think on topics. Maybe it's a way of thinking of what could be a personal bubble. Maybe it's the inner world of an AI. Maybe it's a panorama of the future with the panorama of signals. Or maybe it's a way of seeing art as a giant box of ideas. But really with an artwork, you can really have that very creative thinking based on subjective interpretation and a combination between knowledge and sensorial perception. So in that laboratory, I'm also doing performative photography in the public space. I'm doing photographic montage in magazines and telling stories about it. I really wanted to focus on one artwork so that we have a good sense of, the richness of an artwork as a way, as also the possibility to see artwork as signal of change or signals of the future. So I'm not going to go so much into details. You can screenshot and read, but now I'm going to share also how from that artistic practice of working with images, of doing photo montage, of working with hundreds of images, it is also a way of being very agile and very, to have a very good visual literacy. And in my future research project, I often also do image research with online curation. And it can be to support the design of fictional projects, as in design fiction project, or as a way of analyzing future trends, as providing future inspiration, as designing future scenarios, future world, future workshops, kit. So it's really from my artistic practice that I've gained that agility and that ability to also work with images. And so I show you, how from one side I shift to the other. And then I'm going to share also with you my ID lab, which I started really with this notion of how as an artist I can produce knowledge, but also interrogate what is knowledge, what is the aesthetic dimension of knowledge, because when you see the scientific knowledge are and I really love to draw diagrams. For me, conceptual diagrams was really my way of thinking. Even in finance, I was doing conceptual diagram, and I was doing conceptual diagram to prepare my radio shows as well. It was really a way of thinking, of mapping ideas. And so my idea lab really was first creating conceptual diagram that can be with this dual value of being an artwork, which I can show in an exhibition, and at the same time being a knowledge production that I can use in a future research project. So my key, and also I was, because I was also following the transformation of economy, I was very interested in the rise of the knowledge economy. That was, for me, there was something between the knowledge economy and the heritage of conceptual art. Conceptual art was always looking to dematerialize art, to say art is just about ideas. And I really wanted to take part in that discussion between conceptual art and knowledge production. So my idea lab is called in French Laboratoire d'Ingénierie d'Idées, Idea Engineering Laboratory. Now I say LEAD. And later on it became LEAD Future Lab. But really the base of that lab was really to explore art-based knowledge, the aesthetic of knowledge via diagrams, and also to design research methodologies such as polygonal research to address the topics through multifaceted approach, or semiospace, how to spatialize knowledge to facilitate knowledge sharing, knowledge and workshops. So that was like this really focus on art and knowledge, and I'm still part of artistic research discussion. And also with that notion of art and knowledge economy, I really wanted to be myself an artist entrepreneur, but to develop my knowledge economy as an artist and bring my artistic intelligence, my aesthetic intelligence to companies and to support myself. I was aware that it was very hard to make a living as an artist. And because I had that background, I was really keen on having my own platform. And so LEAD was really like this notion of art and knowledge, and also art and organization. And that's how I started to develop collaboration with companies and develop my own tools, my own concepts, such as offering aesthetic audits of companies, to design methods to explore the creative dimension of organization, to explore their immaterial dimension. That notion of the immaterial is something very present in my way of working in general. I'm always, bridging the physical experience with the immaterial, the imaginary, the knowledge. I think it's really important to be in this dual dimension. And voila. So with that lab, I started my first collaboration doing an aesthetic audit prototype, showing that work also in galleries. You see a diagram as exhibitions in the middle. And I did also in 2003 my first R&D project, as I really wanted to experiment what could be an aesthetic audit of a city. And I did that project on Christiania. I'm not going to speak more about it because I'll come back on it a bit later, but that gives a little bit of an overview on my focus between image work, image lab, and my ID lab, which became Lead Future Lab later on. So that gives like really my core, my base.
Thank you for anchoring us in the work, the bridging work that you do. And I just love that image, that one of those early ones you shared of bringing together, you know, a soundtrack in a room that's highly variable in terms of the emotions that it invites you into, a disco ball, 800 photographs. It feels like there's some really good fodder there for generativity, which I think is so much a part of the Foresight practice.
Mm-hmm.
So that anchors us. Next, I'd love to hear, you know, if you could talk a little bit more about what your lab lead does today. Anything about organizations that you're working with that might help anchor us in the work?
Yeah, I mean, with pleasure. It's I thought it was interesting to show that from an artistic practice, you can really develop. I thought also the artist entrepreneur model is really interesting. I'm part of a network of people. I mean, there have been artist entrepreneurs since the 70s. John Latham is a really interesting English artist. So that model, there is also a genealogy of an artist entrepreneur. And me, at some point, I really shifted with providing artistic services to offering future services. So again, I'm going to share one slide. It's easier to voilà, tiens, c'est curieux. Ah oui, non, it's twice. OK. Voilà, OK. So I think there is a problem with my screen sharing. My slide don't move. Alors, I start it again. Let's see. Ah oui, I know why.
Just as you're doing that, I was thinking about how you were describing the value of hypotheses and how an artistic practice can create conditions where you can test hypotheses and test them and probably iterate on them. And it was just reminding me from our work how important it is to ask what if questions and use that as a framing for testing different hypotheses. So I think there's another good resonance there. Looks like we can see your slides.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, because I was on full screen. Yeah, the what if, I mean, typically with an artwork like this one, you can go for, you know, plenty of what if. When I'm putting as like also the metaphorical dimension of art can be really fertile. So image-based research, our lead first, artistic base with that notion of knowledge. Also, one thing is about producing mental images, which is one of the core aspects of my research, and I'll come back on that. So lead, now I offer my future research services. It takes a different aspect. One side is really to produce content such as future trends, future inspiration, future scenarios, future images, future map, also pedagogy. That can be in a written form, as conference. I do a lot of keynotes. So one part is content and another part is collaborative process. It can be one simple workshop, or it can be what I call the future lab, where I install a future research process. But my approach is really to customize the method, because originally I was not trained as a futurist. I started my project by designing methods for each project, and it's much later that, you know, I did I trained myself to know the classic method, the scenario planning, the CLA, but I actually never use them. And I think it's really one of my specialties to really be first, where are we? What is the organization? Who are the people we are embarking? What is the topic? How much time do we have? How much money do we have? What is the format we want to have at the end? Is it something visual? Is it something written? Is it in an event? So it's really more, my approach is to customize the method I use. And also part of that method and process design, I also learn so much from some of my clients that have been training me in a way. And one of my historical client is Peclers, Peclers Future Trend, which is one of the historical future trend agency in Paris. I work every year with them. They used to do the future book, which is the image on the top left, which was a yearly future trend report with international societal trends, touching on really a very broad scope. It's really a perception of what is emerging in the society on the topic of sustainability, nature, well-being, identities, our innovation ecosystems, our science, technologies, globalization, value systems, imaginaries. Is really this giant panorama of what is new, what is emerging, and what comes next. And it's a trend report with a horizon. I would say it's a 5 years forecast. It's not a distant future. It's more what is here from today. It's really the future that is already here. And working with them every year has been a chance for me to be to increase my capacity in trend analysis, and also to be quite up to date on a very broad topic. So we are a whole team of our future researcher to do this report every year. Now it's not in the shape of a published report. It's an in-house material to feed all the consultants. But it's for me a way of being very up to date, and I really it's a very important collaboration for me. But for that one, it's really about content. Another example, for instance, when I worked with the Museum of Art and History in Geneva last year, it's more like, in this case, the point is to explore the future, but more in a HR orientation. We want to bring we brought, it's 80 collaborators, so it's almost half the staff of the museum that embark in the journey. And it's a 1-year program to make the whole community of people be looking toward the future and update their talent, update their way of perceiving their museum. So it's more like updating mindset, turning toward the future rather than being anchored in the past. And so the point of that HR Future Lab is really about supporting organizational resilience. There was also a lot of difficulty among the teams, and in this case it's a HR-oriented Future Lab. And in this case, it's the scanning is a base, trend is also part of the methods, but also interviews and sharing documents. And so it's really about more installing a practice. And so now the Future Lab is fully incubated and the teams are continuing without me. And that was really the point. So that's another example where I provide only some content at the beginning to give some insight on the transitions, for instance. Like in this case, I share at the very beginning, I made a masterclass to give an overview of, with first question of how current transition might impact museums. And after, in workshops, we go further and engage in a collaborative research. But that was a really amazing experience, and it worked extremely well. When I work with IHEST, this is an executive training program. In this case, it's sometimes for a very short time, had to have 10 people who are not knowledge at all on a topic come up with an interesting scenario in 2.5 hours. Like, sometimes it's like the time comes. it's a time constraint, makes it like, how do I manage to bring those people towards something that is interesting in 2.5 hours? Sometimes in this case, it will be on 6 months, but with them, I've had a chance to experiment some very different formats of collaborative research. And I really like to have that chance to, prototype also micro modules with them. With CNRS, in this case, it's more the institute in the second world biggest science research institute. It's 15,000 scientists working in this institute. It's and for the 8 years anniversary, they wanted to, update their discourse, their strategy. But at the same time, in the scientific institute, it's very hard to speculate on the future in any way. Scientists, they don't necessarily like so much the future. And in a way, it was very much about prefiguring some possible scenarios for them so that it would help them to articulate a future-oriented vision for those events. And then the end of the project was also to co-design concrete programs. And it was a giant program. And there was like hundreds of events in France and abroad. So it was like a really huge. So in this case, it's more foresight for design and innovation, like really applied. And in this case, I'm more bringing insight, perspective on transitions, and I'm prefiguring, pre-designing scenarios, because also they didn't have time to engage in a proper process to design scenarios. Now for the Institute of the Future.
There's one person who's asked a question that I think you're perfectly answering right now. Becky had asked, I'd love to hear how you approach a project. How do you start? What direction do you usually progress through? And one of the things that I'm hearing is that there is no one uniform progression. You really take each one as a bespoke instance and understand what the constraints are and what the opportunity is that starts to shape up. So I appreciate hearing this about your methodology. And I hope, Becky, that starts to answer your question. Maybe we have time for one more example on this piece. And I scanned the attendee list, and I know that there are a couple of people in attendance today who are especially interested in fashion and beauty. So I wonder if you would be willing to share about the Chanel piece.
Yes, with great pleasure. And it's one of my oldest case, and in this case, I would say it's more design research. It was about working with the scientists who were creating new cosmetics, and they wanted to have some new insight to create new cosmetics, but without collaborating with the marketing and the communication department that normally do all the wrap up around cosmetic. They were really the scientists in the laboratories, and they wanted to engage in their own creative journey to imagine other alternative approach on cosmetics. And so today I'm being aware of what is design research, but at that time I was not close to the design world. So I can say that now that project was more like a futures design project, where I provided trends and insights, but also I brought a lot of creative ideas of what could be, I would say, artifact of the futures. But one thing that I really brought in that process that is typically what through an artistic approach you would bring is that I also propose to them and to envision the cosmetic as something that served to nothing. And that was like a kind of provocation that I had put in all the ideas that I had generated with. We were several to work on this project, and I embarked the scientists in the process. But one of the ideas that I put in the bulk was really to also consider maybe a cream can be just for the pleasure of putting cream on your face, and it doesn't have to have any, performance, which is like really typically what with an art project, their art is about no function, to the opposite of design. Design is very centered on use, and through a design approach, you always take a focus on the right form for the right use. In art, it's more form content, the right message for the right form. And I thought it was interesting. And actually, they really picked that idea, which I was really surprised. And so we went into a whole exploration of what could be a non-physical benefit from a cosmetic, the pure sensorial quality, or the pure psychological quality. So we came into this, we went very far into the psychological dimension and the psychological benefit of the experience. So that's an example also. So it's like really the opposite. It's very applied. And it shows also how through an artistic lens, you can also bring some disruptive way of thinking in an innovation process, for instance.
Oh, interesting comments in the chat on this one as well. We need to hear about your work with cities. Can you take us into that lens? You know, at Institute for the Future, we work with city leaders. Sometimes it's a chief resilience officer, sometimes it's a mayor in the US context, civic leaders, broadly speaking. And so I'm very intrigued to hear more about your work in Greater Paris.
Yeah, let me share. Hello. Yeah, so cities, it's a big part of my work. Before I speak because the Greater Paris, as I said, at LEAD, there is like client cases, and then I try to always keep R&D project because I remain a researcher. I really like to also be one step ahead. So I really cultivate R&D project, and the Greater Paris was my R&D project from 2008 to 2018, and now I have another one. But before I go in those labs, just to focus on how I work with cities and on urban cases. So the same principle as for companies. One side is producing content, and another part is about collaborating and designing specific process and methods that fit for the context. I think it's always the most important to make sure via the research process you create impact where you want to create impact, like really to have that impact, impact, value, purpose, meaning for participants, and then the methods result from those parameters. So regarding urban research content, so my last article that came is fostering resilient co-learning ecosystem in the city. So it's a continuation of that exploration of ecosystems and resilience. And also one important client has been Bouygues Real Estate and Bouygues Construction, which is like the French biggest real estate and construction group. It's a giant company. And I did a series of future trend report for them on the future of cities, on the future of campuses, on the future of urban and social innovation, and on the future of urban resilience. So that content is also something that I've been, irrigating all my other collaborations, such as also my Greater Paris project has been feeding. So it's really an ecosystem. From one case to the other, I'm always upgrading, continuing, pushing the research. So some of the last projects that are interesting, maybe I can speak of a small collaboration with the Lausanne University, who had a mandate from the World Health Organization to understand better what was urban health, toward what it was developing. So it's a small collaboration, but very interesting for me also to engage in that world of health. Soferim Real Estate is a case where, it's a real estate company. In France, there have been in the last few years a lot of new open call for real estate companies to come up with urban innovative project, meaning it should be a building, but also communities of users, co-investors, partners, and for real estate and classic real estate actors, it has been a challenge to upgrade and update the methods. And so I worked with them to really engage in a future trend research with them, and also co-design with them innovative urban projects. So in this case, it's really future trend for innovation and innovative urban projects, so quite applied. Another case, the Luma Foundation in Arles, they have a very broad, it's a giant artistic institution in Luma, in Arles, in the south of France. They have an impact on the region that is incredible. It's a little bit of a Bilbao effect. So in this case, I helped them to clarify all the collaboration they had with different stakeholders, locally and internationally, to articulate future scenarios of the city with their impact part of the picture, because they are so impactful. I mean, it's really a metamorphosis of the city with the arrival. So it's quite delicate for them to have the right vision on what should be their role, and not replace the city hall in a way, because it's so much money also being invested in the city. And so resilient future scenarios was very much also about helping on the what I call the future diplomacy, to make sure that there is a proper relation around those future scenarios. And so that was a really interesting case. And last case that I'm going to that I can mention is Montevideo, very different project, which I did with the City of Montevideo and the architecture school. In this case, I came as a residency for a couple of months, and the point was to incubate a future lab and gather a community of 30 local creatives to create the art neighborhood. So I served more as a catalyst to install that, to install a shared future exploration and incubate project in that neighborhood. And then I left and they continued without me, just like a little bit like the Museum of Art and History, like really like the collaborative and the incubation of the process. So it was called Montevideo Experimental, making the future with art, with this idea of like really engaging the future. Voilà, I can speak a little bit about the city of Christiania, the city of Copenhagen. My first which I did as an R&D project. It was self-funded. I went to see what can I say on the city if I change of hat and I become an urban researcher. And it's at that moment, the government launched an idea competition to rethink the future of Christiania. And I thought, okay, let's make a proposal to see if I'm able to articulate a proper, future scenario for a city. And I ended up winning that competition. And so it refunded my whole research. And so that's also an example of how I'm always, engaging in R&D and making sure that I get funding for it along the road. And Christiania is an interesting case because it's a self-organized city. It's one of the oldest creative communities. It was created in 1971, and it has remained a fully autonomous city within the city. And so for people who are interested in alternative model, it's really, and my article that was published in Knowledge Cities is still downloaded very frequently, and it's still a case that I'm always referring to. So that gives you a little bit the scope between providing content, designing trends and scenarios, designing projects, the whole spectrum, always using trends. Really, the base of my practice is really articulating trends at different scales and understanding with those trends how you can go toward the future and design a future scenario. So I'm not using the regular matrix. It's really always as trend plus co-design of scenarios. And then now that I can go on the Greater Paris case, which is the large R&D project that I did from 2008. So in this case, I went much further into the design of prototyping methodologies. The first part was to really design this diagram on the top left and have a sense of the different layers of the city and how they change. The urban shape doesn't change as quickly as the architectural institution, as the social use, as the imaginaries, which are the 4 layers in that diagrams. And I really, that project, I started to work on that conceptual diagram with that idea that the Greater Paris could be a kind of urban galaxy. It was so big, Paris becoming the Greater Paris was shifting from 2.5 million to include the suburb with 11 million people. So it was a giant scaling up. So it was really about creating another city with a very different community and very different. And that's why, and some people even were saying that it could be much bigger than this. And so the urban galaxy was the metaphor. And I use that I use astrophysician template to understand the cosmos, to analyze the city with those different layers. So the map that you see on top left is really inspired by astrophysics representation. And so the first part was really designing that conceptual model to address the futures of the city. Then after I did about 30 different experiences. So I started alone, and then my project was hosted at the Art Research Department of the Sorbonne University. I won several academic research grants for it, some pedagogic innovation grants as well. And the second big chapter was really to focus on the creative ecosystem, the creative constellation of the city, how to make the future with those creative constellation, all those creative structures that were existing beyond the peripheric in the suburb, what could be an empowering strategy and an empowering scenario to make the future with those creative forces of the city. So very similar to what I did in Montevideo, which was about the same time, 2013, 2004. I was really in this making the future together. I see also crafting the future together. And I think it's really interesting to really envision the scenario with the stakeholders that are already in place. Other option was co-designing a future art project with students in an art management program, designing also far future scenarios. So that was a multidisciplinary pedagogic innovation experiment with a performative installation, so that the image at the bottom. In this case, it was like we were looking at 150 years ahead, so really far futures. And in this case, we were with a team of a researcher in foresight, in architecture, in urban design, in geography, me from art, and we had students from all those disciplines, literature, geography. So it was a really, and we did a kind of like future camp. It was a very immersive process for 1 week. And there was this installation that were used as giant mood boards. You see on the left here, it's images and information, its critical future challenges, and students had to create visual boards, visual representation of future, which could be maybe futurescape. But at that time, I didn't know the term of futurescaping, but now looking back, I know that it's very similar. And at the end of the session, we were inviting experts to brainstorm with the students and to discuss and challenge their future vision. So we did 2 rounds with 2 groups of experts that were foresight experts, a really interesting community of experts. And it was really interesting to see that it was as interested for the expert as for the student, as for the team. Really amazing project. Another part of the project.
I want to hear more about this. I feel like you've given me so many trailheads to go down that I want to further explore. But I know we have a few questions, and there's one last piece that I was hoping that you could speak to, which is really around your current R&D lab and, the new partnerships that you're developing there. And I so appreciate how you acknowledge that we reach the limitations of our cognitive selves, and, logic reaches its limits, and, we need to then think in more of a wide, constantly challenge ourselves to widen the frame. And I feel like this last project, even if you can share, say 2-3 minutes on it, and then we'll ask.
I'll be very brief. Yeah. So after Paris Galaxy, where I finished with the book, I engaged a new round of research in 2017, because from all my research, it was clear that we really needed to rethink how we live on Earth, whether it's because of AI, because of the Anthropocene. And I really wanted to engage a proper research on what can be those new, bigger pictures It's quite difficult because we can map trends, build scenarios, have our schemes, but how to reset everything, what I call the anthropological and epistemological reset. And so that project, I mean, there will be soon a dedicated website, and for that project I have designed as well a conceptual canvas. So there have been many versions of that canvas. Today is the final one. There is a performative installation, just like in the previous project, and there is a series of articles. And I'm not going to say much more. It's really about this R&D, about using diagrams, using images, and also, at that limit where it's so difficult to have any rationality, art is really interesting to propose vision and shapes of so the conceptual diagram here, let me if I can make, it's about building and scaling reality and change with different levels. So one is a ontological lens, the smallest, and then micro, mezzo, and macro are scale that we usually address in foresight or in design, I would say. And the bigger picture is that question that is behind. And so I'm trying with one canvas like that to help build new world, build future world, build scenarios, or maybe just put order and appreciate future research material. So I will stop with that last diagram and escape from the stop sharing my screen. Or I can, no, you want to stay with?
No, it's good. It's good. We'll stop sharing because I want to ask a couple of questions that have come up. Early on, Marie Michel asked, I would love to hear you talk about how to do scanning, foresight horizontal is how she put it, using art and art exhibition observations. And I think you spoke to that, through several of the projects that you've discussed. But anything else to add to?
Well, I mean, yes, I can speak about, because I mean, art is always present in my future content because I think it's always really relevant. Even you put it next to a scientific research or a tech prototype or a social event, an artwork is always giving that imaginary layer that is sometimes missing, and it's also very opening plenty of a more qualitative vocabulary because there is aesthetic dimension. You can and then regarding the way I analyze trends, I mean, people speak of weak signals and finding the weak signals. For me, it's never one weak signal. It's about also, looking at a lot of signals and clustering signals. And really, it's more like, just like with my photographic installation at the beginning, it's a lot of material, and then it's skimming and skimming and skimming. And at some point, you have the 5 signals that show the trends.
Yep.
And for me, it's like, that hope of you'll find the one piece of jewel or the wild card, the weak signal. Is in fact more like a skimming process of, at some point, having the one that is the most meaningful. But it's always, I would say it's more bulk and something that is very much about that battle between order and chaos as well, of looking at plenty of things and putting order and figuring out what's going on. So it's the information and also it's I do always a lot of historical research to understand historical change, and I'm really keen on theory as well. And one thing that I'm really picky or engaged on is conceptualization. As you might have seen, I'm using very specific elements of vocabulary, and that's one of my strengths, because to articulate trends, I see so many trend reports which are so boring because they're just kind of like journalistic language, and to really show the singularity of a trend, the richness of the vocabulary is really important. Also find a new concept to really see the picture completely differently. And so I would say our diversity of information, our clustering, and then that effort of the theoretical, the historical, to have a proper conceptualization of change. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, there are more questions than we have time for. So I will we'll send these to you after, Raphael. It would be great if we could maybe just pick your brain on those last couple of questions. But I
Yes,
need
please.
to ask our colleagues who are here, who have been part of this, just to join me in thanking Raphael for unpacking a little bit of her process and how she lives at the intersection of art and foresight. I can see how it's benefited organizations, communities, a wide range of stakeholders. I'm very impressed by the range of stakeholders that you work with, from real estate developers to students to civic leaders and everything in between. So thank you for this and for sharing about your work. And Aicha, thank you so much for dropping in some of the links that you did in the chat so that people can learn where to go if they would like to understand more about the work. One invitation just in terms of what's coming up next for our Foresight Talk series. Our next Foresight Talk is on building scenarios for rural futures, which is coming up on May 18th. So you can register for that at the Institute for the Future website. June 14th, we have an upcoming signal swap. And this is where Institute for the Future faculty members who teach in our Foresight Essentials dive into some recent signals that they're interested in. And this is a way, just to gather with the community of people who are constantly scanning for those signals, the weak signals that Raphael mentioned, but also the volume of signals so that you can really distill it as she described. And want to thank you for taking this time with us and engaging with Institute for the Future today. So we will hopefully see you soon around the community. And Raphael, I hope you can see some of the kudos that are in the chat. We thank you again for your time.
Yeah, may I just say a word? I mean, if I didn't speak much of the last of my last R&D lab, but I'm totally open to collaboration in academic or corporate context in all situations. Now the method that has been developed is fully ready, and it could be, I'm interested in engaging in their experiment around it. So please reach out if you have any desire to go in that path.
Thank you. Thank you. And for everyone, I think you probably saw her contact information is in the chat. So reach out for any questions via the email address that was shared. Oh, so many kudos coming in. Thank you again. And hope everyone has a great rest of the day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And we'll see you on the next Foresight Talk. Take care.